So with that, I would like to introduce Professor Rachel Cowen, who is chairing tonight's panel. Rachel is a professor of inclusive research and academic development and the University of Manchester's academic lead for equality, diversity and inclusion for gender and sexual orientation. She has 30 years of experience as a cancer researcher, organisational developer and equalities champion. She has led institutional strategy and policy and worked with a network of inspirational colleagues to support academic excellence within a culture that values diversity, inclusion, and prioritizes equality of opportunity, reward, and recognition. She is a mentor, coach, and champion for diverse and inclusive leadership development, supporting the career advancement of colleagues across the university and sector. So please join me in welcoming Professor Rachel Cowen.
Thank you. Hello everyone, can you hear me? Yeah, it really is a pleasure to be here tonight with you, and thank you so much to MDPI for really treating us so well and putting on such a wonderful venue and refreshments for us tonight, which I hope you've all managed to grab, and please do keep going back to as well. We want this to be a really useful panel discussion for you, an informal setting. Feel free to ask questions, ask them in person, or we also have this QR code up here as well to a Google Doc where you can ask those questions in an anonymous way as well if you feel more comfortable. So this is a really important part of our International Women's Day celebrations, and it's great to be at the University of Manchester and to warmly welcome you. For those of you who are outside the university, I know we've got researchers from across the Northwest and maybe even further afield, as well as researchers from our own institution as well, and that will bring a real richness of perspective to this event tonight. So, we're coming together as women in the research and innovation space, in the higher education sector more generally. I want this to feel like a really safe space for you to share your experiences and perspectives. I'm really looking forward to the panel doing the same. So one of my primary reasons for the work that I do at the University of Manchester has been driven by my own experiences as a researcher in UK research and innovation. So I was a cancer researcher for many years, and I worked for Pfizer, the pharmaceutical company, in private research and development, and had experiences in that sector, and realised there was a glass ceiling and I needed a PhD. And that's how I ended up coming to the University of Manchester to do a PhD. I was going to quickly come to the university, do a PhD in such naive terms, I was thinking at the time, and then I was going to go back to private research. And what I found was a place where I felt like I belonged and really could drive forward my research here. So I've never left, and I've progressed up to professor. And now it's my responsibility to really support the careers of everybody within the university, irrespective of background, protected characteristic, or wider experiences, but particularly champion researchers. Because, that's really what drove me to work in the space of gender equality, meeting so many wonderful and inspiring women researchers, but then seeing them facing similar barriers that I'd faced around when to have a family, how to really balance work and life, and then think, I've got to do something about this. And that's how I stepped into the space of inclusive researcher and academic development and into gender equality specifically. So I'm looking forward in sharing my own experiences and perspectives, but very much hearing from you and finding out about you and, also working together to collective solution. So we're going to really have the privilege of hearing from 4 exceptional women academics and researchers here on the panel. We've got people whose careers span global politics, the history of science, interdisciplinary cell biology, and engineering leadership. So each of these people will bring a really deep insight and expertise and distinct perspectives on the realities and possibilities for women in research today. And over the next hour, we're going to really explore this year's theme of International Women's Day, which is Give to Gain. So we're going to explore what that means to each of them, and then really delve into how we can collectively give to each other to generously share our networks, solidarity and experiences to collectively lift all of us up together. And that's very much my mission as gender lead at the university, and looking forward to working cross-institutionally as well, and in partnership with other stakeholders like publishing houses such as MDPI. So without further ado, I'm going to ask each of our panellists to introduce themselves. So first, can I please welcome our first panellist, Professor Tony Hastrup.
Can everyone? Hi. Thank you so much, Rachel, for that warm welcome. My name is Tony Hastrup. I'm a professor and chair in global politics at the University of Manchester in the Faculty of Humanities. I'm not quite sure what to say about myself because I don't really like talking about myself, but I've been at the university now for almost 3 years. I'm one of those people who, unlike a lot of other academics, I don't stay in one place for too long, although I think Manchester might be the exception, mostly because my family is tired of moving around. As I said, I work in global politics, and as we were discussing earlier, this is a particularly interesting time in the context of my own work. So I do research on international security, and for most people who have any interest in global politics, you'll know that it's a very male-dominated field, even now. Across the UK, most politics and international studies departments collectively still have under 30% women. Of course, there's variance within institution, but as a sort of collective, that's where we are. In addition to being a professor, I'm with Rachel, University Academic Lead for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, responsible for race equity. I've just started that role, but it's sort of a combination of different experiences across the sector, both formal and informal. I'm happy to talk about that a bit more later.
Thank you so much. Both microphones are working, so we're winning. Brilliant. So our second panellist is Dr. Sarah Wilner.
Hi, yeah, lovely to see you all. So I'm a senior fellow in the University of Manchester in the Faculty of Biology, Medicine and Health. I've been in Manchester quite a long time now, so about 18 years. So I did my PhD down in London, and then I did a postdoc out in America, and then I came to Manchester to do a second postdoc, and then just have never left. So then I set up my lab here in Manchester. So my research is looking at how mechanical forces regulate our cells and tissues. And so that's really interdisciplinary. So I'm very much from a biology background, but I need the help of physicists and mathematicians to understand what mechanical forces are doing. So that's been a big part of my lab. So my group is about 10 people, and there's always mathematicians and physicists working alongside the biologists. I particularly love doing microscopy, and that's been something that has stuck through my research. I just love the beautiful images that you get and the ability to see new things that nobody's seen before. And so that has led to, at the moment, I'm academic lead for bioimaging in our faculty, which means I have strategic oversight for a facility of about 40 microscopes. And I suppose getting more into that kind of technology side of things has been my second instance of like, where did all the women go? Because certainly when I became a PI and started running my lab, I was suddenly like, where have all the women gone? There's usually maybe about 20% in PI meetings, if you're lucky. And in technology, and actually the PIs, I'd say that's improved over the time that I've been a PI, so PI running a lab. I think that is definitely improving over time, and there's a lot more young female PIs in my area. But in technology, which I only sort of got into recently, being in kind of leadership in technology, again, it's really male, and I would be interested to see why people think that might be. And then I've kind of linked to that kind of technology lead. I also a co-lead on a big discovery research platform, which is a big pot of money that, again, is trying to apply new methods to our area of matrix biology. So I wanted to say a couple of other things that, although my fellowship role, and this varies across the disciplines, but what being a fellow essentially means is that my salary is paid externally. And that has protected my research time, which has been really fantastic for me. But I have to say, I love teaching as well. And so although my time is protected, I'm always quite keen to get involved in the teaching. And for me, that's been something that's been a real positive of being here in Manchester. And so I'm keen to provide advice on that kind of fellowship route, which is a slightly different route from a lectureship route. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that outside of my work, I have a family, 2 daughters. I worked part-time for the first 8 years after having kids, and I'm quite happy to talk about what I see as the kind of pros and cons of working part-time, the sacrifices that you might make.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. That one's not working. You can hear one now. So our next panellist is Dr. Nushin Karimian.
Hi everyone, my name is Nushin, and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Manchester Metropolitan University. My background is engineering, so as you can imagine, a very male-oriented environment. And I pretty much saw that the first day I put my feet into university studying electronic and electrical engineering. I carried on and I actually did my PhD at University of Manchester, and I always wanted to become academic. I come from an academic family, and that was the route for me, and I really enjoy it. So taking on from my PhD and carrying out numerous postdoctoral positions and research projects, I've been working on designing sensors for different industries. I've been working with aerospace industry, and we've been designing sensors, not to sound too geeky, but to ensure that they don't fail due to the cracks that they may possibly build after a few years. And then I moved on to designing sensors for health industry. So I work a lot with NHS on different projects on health of premature babies, and currently we're moving on into the adults inspections. And I'm happy to talk further about that. But in terms of other things about myself, I am the lead of EDI in my department within the within the Faculty of Science and Engineering in our university, and I think that's one of the really interesting roles that I currently have. And despite seeing all the diversity, but yet lack of ladies in our engineering department. So that's quite interesting. For the past 15 years, I've also chaired the IEEE Women in Engineering. So I've been actively involved in ensuring that our future generations learn about engineering and know that engineering is not just about getting your hands dirty. It's about understanding engineering. It's about doing what you like in terms of engineering, possibly becoming a leader in those fields that you enjoy. In terms of family, because that was briefly mentioned, I do have a 3-year-old boy, a really lively son, and it will be my pleasure to talk about how it was difficult to balance full-time job and a motherhood, and especially that my son was born just after the COVID, how everything was affected that way. So that's it for me. It's my pleasure to be here, and I look forward to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're looking forward to collaborating across institutions after this event as well. And last but not least, our fourth panellist, Amelia Bonnet.
Thank you very much, Rachel. It's wonderful to be here. I'm a lecturer in Global History of Science, Technology and Medicine at the Brace Yourself Center for the History of Science, Technology and Medicine across the road in Simon Building. Just like Tony, I'm one of those people who don't stay too long in one place. Although I hope Manchester will be the exception. I was born in Romania, but have spent more than half of my life by now abroad. First in Japan, where I completed my BA and MA in Asian Area Studies. Then in Germany, where I did my PhD and a postdoc. Then in Oxford, and now finally Manchester. Speaking of engineering, my PhD project was on telecommunications in the 19th century. I worked mostly on Japan and the colonial South Asia. Needless to say, there are not many women in engineering. There are not many women in the history of technology either. So when I teach the history of technology, it's very difficult to find literature that has been authored by women scholars. And probably, looking for women in the history of technology and history of science, I ended up publishing an open access volume. Rachel is familiar with it, with Manchester University Press last year on women in science, engineering, and medicine in the 20th century. So I'm very happy to talk about that experience as well. I also have a daughter. I don't want to say too much about that, except that she's probably wondering why I'm not home by now. There are obviously challenges there as well, and I'm happy to discuss them if the microphone is going. Yeah. I think the technology is failing us as usual. This one? It doesn't. Yeah. But that's all from me. Thank you.
Brilliant. So as you can see, we've got a really diverse panel coming from a totally diverse set of disciplines across our universities, and people really willing to honestly talk about their experiences, including work-life balance as well. So we've got some pre-populated questions to get the panel discussion going, but please don't forget the QR code or put your hand up as well. So we'll go through some of the questions initially, maybe one or two, and then we'll open up to the panel and to the QR code. So if I could ask Tony, this year's International Women's Day theme is Give to Gain. What does this mean to you?
I was thinking about that question a lot, including outside actually of research. And I guess in the context of my role at the university, but also within the department and across the sector, I think a lot about research culture. And one of the things that I found, and I think is linked to this theme, is that equitable research cultures are not accidents that happen. They have to be intentional. And that intentionality, which is where I think Give to Gain comes in, requires investment. I find myself in a lot of meetings always talking about investments, even though I have serious issues with capitalism, but it seems to be a language that people understand. And when we talk about investment, and we talk about investment with respect to time, with respect to resources, and institutional political will, as it were, is required. And that if we accept that we need all of these things and that the investment has to be intentional, we could make the argument that why we're doing that is to gain that equitable research culture. And I think that's where the tension is. I think now in 2026, most UK universities would agree that we need equitable research cultures. Not just as something to say, almost everyone around us demands it now. A few days ago, the UKRI released its EDI and research culture report, which it was nice to see. But when you ask most folks who look like me, the extent to which that is reflective of their experiences, we'll be here for another year, I think, in terms of conversation. So when we talk about give to gain, I sort of always, in this context, I think about it as what are the intentional practices that we're engaged with to ensure equitable research cultures. And the answer to that is in investment, and I guess in our context, I think in particular, the institutional investment, but also a sort of investment that takes into consideration the perspectives of those who have been historically minoritized or marginalized. And I think all of us on this panel sort of talking about our different experiences. I don't walk around every day thinking I'm minoritized or marginalized, but every now and then I realize that that is actually what I am. Partly because a lot of my experiences are not reflected in what tends to be the top line policies. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really insightful. And we all need to be giving, not just women and minorities, so that we can all collectively gain. So our work at Manchester has been very much around leadership, accountability, and embedding advocacy for a positive and inclusive research culture. Great. Can I ask the same question to you, Sarah?
Yeah, I kind of came at it from a slightly different angle of just thinking how much, I suppose, I gain personally from helping others to navigate the career path of an academic. And so for me, I really enjoy mentoring others, particularly for the fellowship route, which is the one I know the most about. And I suppose the gain is that you then build a community of people who have been helped and will then go on to help others. And you can feel at a very small scale that research culture changing as people realise the power of being helped and helping others. And I suppose my other thought on this is kind of wound up in that helping others is that you need to realise the point at which you have some power. And I'm not sure I've always been the best at realising that at the point when I have it, because I think for so long as a researcher you're just fighting to kind of get through, to get your results, if you're in the lab, to get them written up, to get that next publication, to get that next grant. And then you suddenly reach a point in your career where you slightly break through that, and you're suddenly like, actually, there might be some ability to change some things here. And so I'm at the point where I'm trying to realise that I need to grasp those opportunities and actually try and do something.
Fabulous, great to hear. So if we could shift to the next question, could I ask you, what do you think? Why do you think it's important to discuss women's experiences in research, particularly on International Women's Day?
Yeah, I think generally because research is not just about knowledge, it's about people carrying out that knowledge and producing that knowledge. And so I think if women's experiences, especially challenges and barriers, are not discussed openly, then they become normalized, and that's not what we want. Especially for an environment where there's huge challenges, barriers, biases, for you name it, any sort of environment that we live in, that we have to always put 200% to possibly achieve what we wanted to achieve. And so I think it's really good that we have platforms such as this one in International Women's Day to openly talk about the challenges that women face in research, and to openly talk about the problems, and also to celebrate what we've achieved so far, and openly and honestly talk about what we have ahead of us. And I think one of the most important things that we need to know, especially about challenges of women in science and research, is that silence maintains barriers. And discussion creates accountability. And that's what we want. And I'll just leave it at that.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Amelia, would you be happy to answer the next question? Yeah. So, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing women in research, and what priorities should we be taking to overcome them?
I have spoken on this topic before, so I'm probably repeating myself, but I tend to think about this as a historian, and so for me the biggest challenge is to understand that the problems women face are place and time specific, right? So they're not going to be the same challenges if we're talking about a former communist country like Romania, where I come from, which has relatively high numbers of women in STEM, for example, compared to countries in Western Europe. Not to mention countries like Japan or South Korea, which have notoriously low numbers of women in STEM, right? So one needs to understand, I think, very well the local environment in order to understand what kind of problems women in research face there and how those challenges can be addressed. And the other point I usually make in relation to this is that I'm not a very great believer in the doctrine of self-help, which is, I'm sure you know, was formulated in this country by Samuel Smiles in the 19th century, and seems to have survived in various iterations to this day. And so what I'm trying to say is that there's only this much you can do when the system is against you. And some problems, many problems are structural, such as the salary and the funding gap, the lack of adequate career progression, the lack of representation in leadership positions, which is a big problem as well. And they do require top to bottom interventions. They require the system to reform itself and change itself, not just to pile more pressure on individuals to perform better or to better themselves. So this is, as I said, it's probably it's a perspective very informed by the research that I have been conducting, and because I see these patterns repeating themselves historically, and we are here because so many things happened in the past that brought us to this point.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You're absolutely right. We did historically ask women to position themselves and fit themselves into the current culture. And now we're very much around looking at our policy, our practice and our culture to really create an environment where anybody can thrive. They don't have to shoehorn themselves in and not be authentic and true to themselves. So with that in mind, Tony, what would an ideal research culture for women look like?
Gosh, I've been thinking about this question a lot because I sit on one of the REF panels or REF advisory panels, so we're constantly thinking about research culture. I think one of the things that has been reinforced for me is that representation is very, very important, but representation is not everything. And sometimes when you say that, folks want to move away from the representation very quickly, but then I say, well, what's the justification for exclusion? Because there has to be some sort of systemic intervention for us to have the low levels of women represented in some of the spaces that we might expect to see them. So I don't think representation is the be-all, but I think that there has to be representation. So how do we move beyond the representation so that it's not everything? I think there has to be some sort of level of conscious inclusion. And this is where, again, I think it's really important that when we are designing systems, and I speak from the design side because one thing we know about institutions is that they are, what the decisions that are made at the moment of design tend to stick, and institutions are there to replicate themselves. So it's not a coincidence that we're still talking about some of these things in 2026, despite the fact that women have been going to university and have been involved in research for a very long time. So because we know that institutions tend to want to reproduce themselves, there has to be sort of an intentional consciousness to the inclusion of women and women's perspectives that takes into account the local environment, as has been said, but that takes into account the diversity of women. And I think, frankly, one of the things that has happened, I think, over the last sort of 20 years that I've been in the sector is we are doing quite well when it comes to gender equality. In terms of the movement, it's extremely slow. It's usually, one step forward, 2 steps back. And now we are living at a time where there are consistent anti-gender mobilizations, a lot of which originate within universities. We've seen them in the most recent by-elections close to us here, but it's everywhere. But beyond that, when we then start to look at gender in an intersectional sense, we are kind of behind. I work at the University of Manchester where we take that kind of thing seriously, and we discuss this all of the time. But what I've seen that has worked is that a commitment, an intentionality, where leadership takes ownership for change, and systems of accountability. But we have to, again, really remember that institutions tend to want to reproduce themselves. So if you think, that thing is just a bit too hard to do now, we'll come back to it later, that's when you really need to push ahead. And sometimes that means making good trouble.
Yeah, a colleague of mine who's an EDI lead at Russell Group University, she sees herself as a wasp in the ear of the senior leadership, just there to buzz around and then maybe sting now and again, cause good trouble. Brilliant. So I'm going to now ask each of you to share a little bit about what supported you during your research career. So, Sarah.
For me, it was the early support I had from supervisors who really believed in me, that I think was absolutely key. I think particularly my PhD supervisor and then my postdoc supervisor here in Manchester, who just really pushed me to write fellowships, and at a point where I wasn't feeling particularly confident about things, and it wasn't about me going to her and saying, I think I might like to do this. It was her coming to me and saying, you need to do this, which I think was really, really helpful, and something I try and do myself now. And I suppose beyond that, as I started my lab, having a good network of colleagues who were very supportive. I've never found kind of official mentors particularly useful. I prefer to kind of flit around and talk to different people at different times, and that has been really helpful. And then the other thing I was just thinking, I think it's true that there's only so much you can do as an individual, and I think it's when structural changes occur can make a big difference. And I suppose in the time that I've been doing research, I think a big thing was in conferences, the push to have 50-50 gender equality has made a big difference. I think it probably did mean more invitations to conferences. You do then have to contend with colleagues saying, it's a really good time to be a woman, because you'll get lots of invitations to conferences, which I've had from well-meaning colleagues, but you're like, I think it's to correct disparity that is there. And that we have been, as women, fighting against rather than being helped by. But those structural changes are really important.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's also really important to remember, if you don't have your supervisor giving you that helpful nudge and telling you that you're ready to apply for a fellowship, that's when a mentor or informal networks can really give you the boost and encouragement that you need, because not all of us have that advocacy, do we? Nushin, what about you?
I would say 3 things. One of them is resilience through challenge. So being an engineer, there's loads of challenges. Being a woman in engineering is quite challenging. So having that resilience, not giving up, that's one of the best things that I think has helped me to achieve what I have achieved so far. And secondly is obviously my loved ones, my family, who have always believed in me. And speaking of PhD supervisor, I have huge respect for my PhD supervisor, who I'm still in touch with. Obviously I'm being biased now, but to me, he's the best engineer I have met. But that's not just my quote, that's the Pro-Vice Chancellors of University of Manchester about him as well. So he is really, really amazing, and he has really supported me when I started my PhD at University of Manchester. He was the one that was really being supportive. That takes me to my last point about opportunities. He was the one that provided opportunities and gave me that push. So when sometimes there's loads and loads of opportunities around you and you may not be able to see it, but having that someone telling you, maybe go for that, try that, that little opportunity could become a grand thing in your life. Thank you. And that could itself change your path. So, taking every opportunity to lead, to speak, to apply, to try. Okay? You don't lose anything. And that's what I felt through my mentors and all those really amazing people around me. So take every opportunities and deal with them with resilience. That's all. Thank
Fabulous. And everyone took the opportunity to come tonight, which is fantastic. Amelia.
Can you hear me? Yes. Well, I wouldn't be here today without the support of family, wonderful friends from all over the world, teachers, but I really want to mention my parents because they've always stood by me. And they never made me feel that women can't, or girls can't do this or that. And my father is an electrician, and in hindsight, that's why I ended up working on the history of telecommunications, because he always taught me about electricity, and he never thought that this is something I couldn't do. And my parents continue, in fact, to shoulder childcare responsibilities, so I can do research as much as I manage to do these days. But they've always been there. And then I've had wonderful teachers as well. And when I started off, I wanted to become a mathematician, and I was set on becoming a mathematician. Then I realized I also liked the history of history. But it was because of teachers who taught me what mathematics was, what history was, right? And still, at the point when I left Romania, I had no idea there was a field called history of science and technology. So then I went to Japan, and that's where I learned there is something called history of science and technology. And again, because I met wonderful teachers there who taught me all these things, and we still keep in touch. And you know, they cheer me on, and they read my books and papers, and we discuss research. So this is the kind of community, I like this term, that I have managed to build. And this is what obviously we have as researchers many bad days as well, but this is what gets me through those bad days. The fact that I can always, talk to my friends and or we discuss these things, or talk with my former teachers. This has been very important for me.
Fabulous, thank you. And last but not least, what's supported you through your career, Tony?
I was going to tell a joke and say bad leaders, because I study international politics, so you can always count on them to do silly things. But in all seriousness, I think for me, I've had folks who now I can label them as mentors or as sponsors, but they've just been there consistently. They've shown up for me. One of which is I met my external examiner 2 days before my Viva, because I thought it was a polite thing to do since he was in my city. And I think I would say from that moment, he's just been someone I could really rely on at any given time. But I think, like everyone else, those who keep the home fires burning have been very significant to my research, because I wouldn't be able to travel, I wouldn't be able to engage in a lot of research if I did not have folks at home who did not mind that I had to go off to Brussels or to New York or to Ghana when I wanted to. And I think finally, about 15 years ago, I made the choice, which is a bit strange one because, you know, in my field, being a solo career is kind of seen as a really good thing. But I made a decision, a feminist decision, that going forward, my research would only be collaborative. And that was something I felt like I had to defend for many, many years, because sometimes collaborative research means that things take a bit longer and people really want to know where your 4-star returns are at a particular date. And so those who've sustained me have been those feminist friends and those critical scholars that have understood when I've had to step away from our projects to do that solo thing because it was a bit faster, that have been instant peer reviewers for work that we did together, and for who have made coming through the ranks as someone who looks like me bearable on most days.
Thank you everyone for sharing your experiences and support. So we'll open up for questions from the room. So who would like to ask a question? Oh, got a hand up, good.
Hi, so my name is Neema. I am a senior lecturer at John Moore University. I'm happy to be here because I did my master's and PhD at University of Manchester. So I'm really glad to be here. My question is, we've had all this wonderful support system that you've had, and especially from the supervisor's point of view. What would you tell for people who had a completely different experience, especially from the supervisors, like who maybe at the point of starting your research career journey, they're quite significant and they don't tend to be that way? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. It really resonated with me because I don't think I did have that advocacy and strong support. It was a very large group, lots of PGR students, very difficult to manage in terms of that. So I think what we've tried to do at the University of Manchester is definitely create an environment where there is a safety net, and it's all, it's not just about that supervisor PGR student relationship, but I will let panel members answer that. So, yeah, Amelia?
I wanted to contribute because when I mentioned the people who supported me, I said teachers on purpose. That didn't include my PhD supervisor. We had a complicated relationship. And the first thing we tried to do, to our credit, I guess, was to talk about it, which worked up to a point, and then it's exactly as Rachel said, it's good to have a broader support network, other people you can talk to. But it does mean that you might not get the letters of recommendation, the good letters of recommendation you need to get, when you apply for jobs. So I luckily finally got that kind of relationship when I started my postdoc in Oxford. And that was when I realized what it actually meant to have a supervisor and someone who acts as a supervisor. So that can happen as well, but it's good to, in my case, it was good to talk about it and try to sort it out, which worked, luckily, to an extent, and then it was also good to talk to other people and try to enlist their support.
Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question. I think most of us, despite some of the nice stories we tell, most of us have either complicated, I really like that word, Amelia, complicated relationships with very neutral relationships. So I really respected my PhD supervisor. He was very much a leader in his field, but I don't think he was particularly invested in me being an academic. And, I'm going to be honest about that. I remember 2 days after my Viva, got notification that I was being invited to an interview for a postdoc. And so I said, he's my supervisor, I've put your name down as a referee. And he's like, okay, yeah, great, I'm happy to give this reference, but now that your PhD has been examined, you should really be asking your external examiners. And I'm like, so is that you telling me? I mean, I didn't say this to him, but effectively he was like, I've washed my hands off you, you may now leave. So you can imagine it was very gratifying running into him in the hallways of the EU, being like, oh, hey, we're being invited for the same things. So that's the revenge that, I hope we all aspire to, really. And I mean, he's a wonderful, lovely guy, and I'm sure he probably, if he did, might have had to do it again. And as I said, I really respect him, but I think most of those relationships are neutral. What I did have while I was doing my PhD is I had a PGR director who was there for me. And that would be the advice is, I think often, especially for myself, who I did not know anyone in my family who'd done a PhD. So I don't know how things worked. But through friends, I found out that you don't have to be sort of tied to your PhD supervisor. They're not a god, even though we tend to see them as such. So I had my PGR director. I luckily had a second supervisor, so I think that's one thing we are doing across the sector where it's not so much a one-on-one, and I think we do that quite well at Manchester. But yeah, my advice would be take the support anywhere you can get it. Don't necessarily expect that just because you have a relatively good intellectual relationship with someone, that support, particularly the one that demands sponsorship and mentorship, will come from that person. Yeah.
Brilliant, great. Other questions?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Molly. I also work at Liverpool John Moores University. My route is very similar to Sarah's, so I'm currently doing an NIHR Advanced Fellowship. And I'm in the area of psychology, which is typically a very female-dominated industry. But what I'm finding is a lot of the people in professorship areas are males, which is quite surprising for the area that I'm in. And it's nice to see so many professors on the panel and people in leadership positions today. But I guess my question is, what is your experience as a woman going through that process of becoming a professor, and if there's any tips for women who are a bit earlier in their careers to how to really push and promote yourselves into them roles when it's not necessarily done across the university?
Yeah, thank you so much. So Tony and I will go first, but then we'll open up. Yeah. So I am analysing the data at the University of Manchester through the EDI lens, and you absolutely see we've reached parity, gender balance, right up to senior lecturer level. The sort of fellowship, independence that you're talking about, and congratulations to you as well for that. And at then that stage, we then start to see, if you like, that dropping off again, and we're currently at 30% across the university of professors who are female. And it's no coincidence that it coincides with sort of life stage where you have a family. I talked briefly at the start about my own experiences of being a cancer researcher, lab-based researcher, just not even conceiving of the possibility of being able to juggle that type of role and the family. So what we're trying to do is call that out. We're trying to put policies and support in place, so people can take those career breaks. It's a natural part of being a human, and also work towards more equitable sharing of caring responsibilities through shared parental leave, support, and so on, which didn't have when I had my two children. So, and the funders are very acutely aware of this as well. They're analysing their own data around fellowships and beyond, and trying to put targeted support in there. But talk honestly and openly about it with more people than be on this panel as well.
but I'll pass over to Tony to share too.
Gosh, so you asked, what can you do? I'm not sure that I'm the best person to give good examples. Actually, with the exception of my professorship, every time I applied for a promotion, they knocked me back. Even though I know for a fact that I never went forward unless I was sure about what it is I had. So I think, yes, the policies are really important because, again, they kind of give us a framework for accountability. But I think it's really important, and this is one of the things I try to think in sort of the different places I'm situated, that, we do have to challenge practices. In my entire career, I'm usually the one who is called in to be on an interview panel for diversity. I'm sure you can understand why. And usually I'm quite gratified that they thought about that, but then you get into the room and some of the same tiny, I guess you can call them unconscious bias or something, still happens in the room. Things like you're interviewing someone for a lectureship, and we all know that it's really competitive. We're very clear about what the criteria is for a lectureship. And somehow, by the time shortlisting is finished, we're only interviewing folks who should be coming in at a senior lectureship level. How do lecturers have a chance there? And so that's something that happens in practice. Of course, you can explain that away and say, well, we're just really going for the best candidate. You can't argue against that. But we need to challenge practices. If this job is for a lectureship, let us ensure that it is for a lectureship on that basis. We are often told, the criteria is very basic. In my own trajectory, I'm teaching and research, so do teaching really well, do research really well, be referable, increasingly do impact, perform service both within the institution and outside the institution. When I came through, sometimes I was doing too much outside the institution, sometimes I wasn't doing enough inside the institution. There's always something. And then you do everything and they tell you, well, you're not being strategic enough, you have to really focus on the one thing. All that is not about policy, though, because I think policies are very clear, they're very good, they're about who holds power. So I think as much as we talk about a lot of this, we need to really think about who's in leadership. So it's really nice that at our university we've got Rachel, and I've seen her in action, so, yay.
I'm on the promotion panel as well.
Yeah. So I think, it's about leadership and sort of that changing the ways in which, or the narrow ways in how we think about excellence, for example, particularly with respect to research. Because I find that even though I'm on a TNR contract, the teaching stuff always feels easier. So there's a sort of internal hierarchy that is also happening, which again is not about policy or criteria, but really about what folks value.
Yeah. Would any of the others want to answer to that?
Thank you. Tony very briefly touched on a couple of points. One was about the hiring panel that you were on. I think it's quite important to embed equity, so making sure that we have ladies in the hiring panels, and this could be in a recruitment panel, it could be in a promotion panel, or it could be purely on when you apply for funding on a funding panel. And so having that balance in the panel, it kind of gives you a hope that there is some form of understanding within the panel. Another thing that is a lot of the time is generally not looked into is there is typically an evaluation system. This could be when you're getting promoted, or it could be when you're getting recruited, that actually and only rewards an uninterrupted linear career. So for
ladies who want to become, or men even who want to become parents, they want to take career break. What happens to the linearity career then? How does that affect them in long term in terms of promotion? And also, I think what's really, really important is to ensure that leadership in all institutions provide a transparent promotion criteria. So it doesn't really matter what background you come from. You all go through that really, really transparent criteria. You tick or you don't tick. And so there's no hidden criteria, if you see what I mean. And so I think it's really important to make sure that we somehow look into creating, if we don't already have that within our institutions, or work on that and expand it a bit more.
Thank you. Can I, oh, sorry.
I'll just add a little. So I was just going to say, the other thing you have to do is you have to go for promotion, and I think you have to encourage your sisters to go for promotion. And I say that as someone who is absolutely awful myself at putting myself forward for promotion. I've only done it once in my whole time, in 18 years in Manchester, and I got it. But that's because I felt absolutely sure at that point they really couldn't not give it me. But that is absolutely on me, that I should go up sooner. And maybe institutionally we could turn it around and put the emphasis less on the individual to be going forward and more on just, if somebody just came to me and said, you have to go for promotion this year, it's, you know, and took some of that responsibility away from me personally, because I think going for promotion internally, it feels very personal, particularly actually the longer you're somewhere, the more so that is, because you know you're being judged by a panel of people that you know pretty well. So for me, that's a very scary prospect. And so I don't know if that's something that's at an institutional level.
Yeah, I mean, some schools have gone down the route of everyone putting a CV in every year. There's sort of the counter-argument that that's creating work and burden for each individual, but I think somewhere in the middle is where we should be. So yeah, so the take-home message is definitely don't wait to be tapped on the shoulder for the fellowship, for the lectureship, for the promotion. Just get your CV brushed up, get some solid feedback, and what's the worst that can happen? You know, you've got to be in it. Don't self-sabotage and reject yourself. Make other people do that. Yeah. So, did we have any questions to the QR code? Oh, right. Okay, we definitely want to get some from there then. 2 more from there, and then we need to get to the refreshments. Molly, tell me when to stop. Are we all right for a couple more? Is everyone all right? Yeah?
So we actually have a really nice question, which says, do you think there are any ways that being a woman has actually strengthened your experience as an academic or researcher? It's very easy to be disheartened by the negatives, but it's lovely to hear the positives and the empowering experiences of being a woman in this space.
Ooh. Who wants to go for that? I mean, most definitely is the answer. But who fancies that one?
I'll try it. Yeah. It's a very personal question. That's why it's a bit difficult to answer. But after my daughter was born, and, you know, the way I interact with her, and I see so many similarities with the students. I didn't realize this when I was a student myself. Right? I didn't realize how young I still was, and it's helped me a lot to think about how students learn and how my daughter learns. And now, because before my daughter was born, I thought, you explain something and that's it, everybody understands it. And I realized much better that there's a much longer and much more complicated learning process at work there. So I see so many parallels, and because of that experience as a mother, I think my the way I teach as well has changed a lot. So that's just a thought I had. Thank you.
I should say that an academic career, once you do have permanency, and I totally recognise, the precarity of fixed-term contracts and early career research and careers. It's a really difficult part of the career stage for everybody, men and women. But in terms of when you do have that security and that network and you feel embedded within organisation as I do now, it has a lot of flexibility and autonomy, and it's deeply satisfying. So, and I get to interact with incredibly inspiring women, particularly, and we're all sort of supporting each other. But I don't know whether any others want to add to that.
I was just going to say, I think it's really difficult because I think most of the way I see myself in science is just as a person and not actually as a woman. To me, that's just a small part of who I am, and it becomes important when you're feeling like you're in a minority or that there might be some discrimination. But actually, for me on a whole, it's more about being a person. And I think being a person in a kind of big global pursuit that science is so rewarding, and to see the people that you've trained coming up and into that amazing community of like-minded people and it's people rather than particularly just the women within it.
Great. Should we have one more from the QR code, and then we'll get to the drinks and the nibbles?
So somebody said that Sarah's comment about male colleagues remarking on the benefits of being a woman really resonate with their experience, and would like to know, how do you handle these colleagues and experiences?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work at Manchester trying to bust the myth of meritocracy. So we've been working with our leaders, and particularly with our research leads, to get them to really think about the culture and some of their own experiences and some of the lucky breaks they maybe had, and why that might have been so, and why there might have been barriers for other people, particularly women and minorities. And we're trying to call it out, as well as work and educate people. But yeah, it's deeply frustrating, but it does need to be called out. And challenged, and we say we recruit on merit and we promote on merit, but then we're then asking certain groups of people to work twice as hard as other groups and to amass a CV that has much more evidence than other people, and that absolutely needs addressing and calling out.
So before I started my work here, when I was applying for my promotion to be professor, there was a section in the box that asked if there were any mitigating circumstances I want to talk about, specifically with respect to COVID. Now, I don't have kids, so I didn't think there was anything that I experienced in COVID that could really beat the experiences of my colleagues who had to homeschool and still come to work. So I spent some time in that box, using my best skill as a researcher, fully citing the ways in which women and minoritized colleagues are, pardon my language, screwed over consistently, and the ways in which COVID magnified that. And I remember after it was all over, someone saying, that was a really interesting read, because all I did was just cite it, look at the numbers of who got UKRI grants. As a feminist scholar, I'm the minority of the minority in the social sciences, that we don't get funding for work that is sort of related to minoritized folks, and women tend not to get the sort of funding. So effectively, I wrote a short essay that was fully referenced, because we're in an educational institution, about the sort of ways in which the systems serve to create and undermine us. So it's not that, I want them to mitigate for me as if I'm the one who's done something wrong, but rather that they should really fix themselves. So that was how I called that out in that particular moment. And I think that is indeed what we have to do, to sort of say, if someone is saying, well, this is the average level of research income in your particular area, and then I'll say, yes, but who tends to be the majority of that average? Certainly not me. And I think we need, everyone is always like, well, if you provide evidence, then we'll do something about it. I don't think we need more evidence, because the evidence is out there, but I think we do need to use systematically what it is that we have and the thing that they say they value.
I was just going to say, the time that really happened to me, I didn't call it out at the time because I felt it was well-meaning, but obviously wrong. And so I suppose one thing as an individual is I don't think you have the responsibility to constantly call things out. I think you use your opportunities where you feel prepared and that you've got your arguments ready. And so when I'm feeling in that state of mind, I will call it out. But if it's a time where it's taken me by surprise and I might not react in a very rational, calm way, I would often just let it pass at that moment. That's been my approach. But
yeah, no, that's right. And it's for people like me and Tony and, you know, Nushin, who are, and for you to come and reflect and share your experiences with us, so that we can also share those with the leaders and senior decision makers in our organisations. So I think I will draw this panel discussion to a close. Please can you join me in thanking all of the panel members. And once again, a huge thank you to MDPI for sponsoring this event, for creating it, organising it and treating us so well. And thank you for all your questions and engagement. And we're looking forward to networking with you and sharing some more in the informal space as well. Thank you so much.